So I'm probably stuck in the 90s, but Seinfeld happens to be one of my favorite episodes. And if you're a guest here, you're like, why in the world are you playing Seinfeld for your Christmas service? Well, there's a lot of reasons, because how many of you, Christmas oftentimes looks like Festivus. Let me ask you this way. How many of you have one of those kind of crazy Aunt Sally's or crazy Uncle Joe's who maybe hit the eggnog about 8 o'clock in the morning, and by the time he got to your party, he was obnoxiously loud? How many of y'all got a family member like that you deal with? How many of you got somebody at work that you deal with that's difficult, that you may have a personality conflict? See, there's a few of you that are honest. A few of you have your whole family here, so you can't raise your hand. I get it. And for those of you that didn't raise your hand, there's a truth that you may not be admitting. You might be that one. Christmas time, we've been looking at it all month long, how oftentimes Christmas, we sing songs like Joy to the World, and Christmas is full of flowers and happy music. But for a lot of people, Christmas is oftentimes a time of high anxiety, high stress. There's a lot of things to be done. There's a lot of family that comes in. There's just a lot going on. And then on top of that, if you have grief, if you've lost somebody, I've talked to people all month long who this has brought out emotions of this is the first year that we didn't get together at grandma's house, or this is the first, whatever emotions you go into the holiday season with, oftentimes it is blown up huge, because Christmas is the time that we remember so many things. We've looked at the Christmas verse. It's John 3:16. It says, "For God loved the world so much that he sent his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life." That verse right there sums up the entire Christmas story. Then we looked at who the characters of the Christmas story were, and what we found is that outside of Jesus, the most important person in the Christmas story is actually you. You are the whosoever. There was a point in your life, if you're a Christ follower, that you made that decision and you were the whosoever that accepted him. For others out there, you guys, by the way, last week we talked about, we were going to do a whole service based on inviting the whosoevers. And y'all rocked it out. Last week we did a service, we call it Christmas Coffee House. We had a little over 640 people walk through our doors here at TWCC, and so many of those were guests that you invited. You got out of your comfort zone, you handed them a ticket, and I love the stories that I heard of, oh my goodness, they were here, oh my goodness, they showed up, oh my goodness. I even had one person said, they haven't been in church for 20 years, please don't mess it up. To which I said, thanks, no pressure there. I wasn't the one doing a story, so I didn't have to worry about it. We also looked at the Christmas story in this aspect. We saw in John 1, it says, in the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness. We talk about how darkness cannot exist when you bring light into it. And no matter how dark the world actually seems, the truth of it is the light has already come, and we live for a day greater than today. And then it goes on to say, he came into the very world he created, but the world didn't recognize him. He came to his own people, and even they rejected him. But to all who believed and accepted him, he gave them the right to become children of God. The Word became flesh, and he gave us the ability to live with him in eternity. The greatest gift ever given was the gift of eternity, because without the birth of Jesus, we wouldn't have the death of Jesus. Without the death, we wouldn't have the resurrection. Without all of that, we wouldn't have hope. And so the Son came into the world, Word became flesh to give us hope in eternity and to live with the Father. Today, I want to read a Christmas story about one of the greatest gifts. Jesus actually told it himself. It's one of the greatest gifts that you can give this Christmas. When you talk about dealing with difficult people, when you talk about dealing with people at work, when you talk about those people in your life who bring you anxiety or stress, or they just rub you the wrong way, or maybe you've got a hurt in your life that you hold against somebody, or a bitterness that you have, or there was something in the past, maybe they said something, any type of difficult person, this is the season that you can actually give one of the best gifts, not just to them, but to yourself. If you got your Bibles this morning, we're going to be in Luke 15. It's a little bit of a long passage, but I want to read it. It's one of my favorite passages. And then we're going to break down and look at the characters of the greatest gift of Christmas. It says this: a man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, the younger son packed all of his belongings and moved to a distant land, and there he wasted all the money in wild living. About the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him. But no one gave him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son. He embraced him and he kissed him. His son said to him, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. But his father said to the servants, quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his fingers and sandals for his feet. Kill the calf we've been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast. And then a little bit later, the older brother was angry, and he wouldn't go into the party. His father came out and he begged him, but he replied, all these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to do. And in all that time, you never gave me even one young goat for a feast for my friends. Yet when this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fatted calf. His father said to him, look, dear son, you have always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found. Some of you may be asking, how does the story? This story is actually called the prodigal son or the lost son, depending on what version you read. But how is this a Christmas story? What does it have to do with Festivus? What does it have to do with dealing with difficult people? Well, the tie-in is this is actually a story about you and I. This is a story about the person that you've been praying for so long. This is a story about all of us, and it is actually a Christmas story about the greatest gift God gives us. Can you imagine that party for a second? First off, my parents have moved down here, and me and my dad have an amazing relationship. But I can imagine if I walked up to him and said, hey, you owe me, give me everything that you owe me. I'm 17. You give it to me now, and him actually doing that. He would have probably been like, boy, that's how it would have started. I won't talk about how it would have finished. But here's the deal. So this kid walks up to his father, and he says, look, you owe me. And his father, for whatever reason, gives it to him. And then he goes out, and he does what almost any teenager would do when they have a ton of money. He blew it on partying, and he made a lot of mistakes. He wandered far away from the teaching and the love of his father, right? And then he hits a point. He hits a point at his lowest point when you have nowhere to look but up. He hits a point and he says, man, even if I could just be a slave on my father's land, I'm going to go to him and I'm going to beg for mercy. And see, here's the crazy thing. He didn't have to beg for mercy. You see, the story talks about the father sees him from a long way off, and the father ran to him. You see, the father had every right to point his finger and say, boy, I told you so. You made your choice. Boy, I told you so. You made your bed. Now go like, boy, if you had just listened. But he didn't. You see, what it says is the father ran to the son. And then the final verse of that story was, he was lost, and now he's found. He was dead, now he's alive. See, that is the gift that God gives us this Christmas. That story is all wrapped around Jesus talking about. There's three characters in that story. There's the father, there's the wayward son, and then there's the good son, the good brother. Well, the father is actually God in the story. The wayward son is those of us who have gone way off and done the crazy stuff and sinned against the father. And regardless of how bad we got, I mean, it tells of the story that he was out partying in some of the worst ways you could party. But the story is this. It's God's gift says, I run to you when you come home. I give you grace when you come home. I give you forgiveness when you come home. And then in this story, there's another character that I like to point out often. How many of you are the good kid that just did the right thing? You never got in trouble. You made all A's. Nobody really likes you, but you were always the good kid, right? You were the one that messed up the curve in the grades. You always got the good grades. This was the brother. The brother said, you know what? I have done everything right. Well, see, this story even looks at it like this. There's two ways you can give a gift this season. You can forgive others as the brother should have done, or you can forgive yourself as the wayward brother needed to do. Let's look at these characters real quick. The first one is the good brother. The brother was offended. The brother in this story was offended. He had done everything right. Crazy brother went off, blew it, took his inheritance, partied it up. They were talking about him after he left. He was that relative that you have that when he walks in, everybody rolls their eyes. He was that one that you sit around the table and you're like, oh man, I wonder where he's at. And see, the crazy thing about this is this brother was offended that his brother came back and got the same grace that he got. He got the same gift that he got. He's like, man, I've been doing everything right, but this guy who's done everything wrong gets the same grace. Isn't that the beauty of the Christmas story? Regardless if you're sitting in here and you think in your brain, man, there's this thing that I did that I can never be forgiven for. God says, you know what? My grace is sufficient. My gift is enough. My son covers your sin. Many of you go into the holidays with offense in our hearts, bitterness over past hurts. People that we have to celebrate with that all year long we don't have to deal with, but all of a sudden around Christmas time everybody gets together and some of us have these offenses in our heart and it eats us up. Maybe it was abuse. Maybe it was words that were said to you when you were a child. Maybe it was an action that a friend did or a coworker did. Maybe they stabbed you in the back. Whatever that negative emotion is, I know more often than not that Christmas time brings out those negative emotions. In Christmas time, when we deal with difficult people, it can bring out the anger. It can bring out the hurt. It can bring out. But here's the cool thing about it. Jesus, the one that we're celebrating this season, actually had the same issues. When I think about Christmas, I think about everybody sitting around a table. And I have a lot of people that are like, oh man, my family's in town and I don't know, my sister's coming and man, she's just gonna cause, or we're going to my in-laws' house and they're gonna, and there's just so much anxiety wrapped around it. Well, Jesus gave us the perfect model of how to deal with difficult people during the holidays, because Jesus sat around a table constantly for 3.5 years. Jesus sat around the table with difficult people. I started looking at who Jesus hung out with as kind of a model about how we should deal with difficult people in the holidays. When we look at who Jesus hung out with, there was Peter. Peter, the loud personality. Peter, the brash guy, the life of the party. He's got every conversation. He's got to be the loudest one. Every conversation, he's got to overtake the conversation. He often makes people feel uncomfortable. He'll push the limits on stuff. Does anybody have a Peter in your family? Don't raise your hand if you're sitting by him. There's John. John is one of the sons of thunder. John is one of the disciples he was a debater. He was constantly debating. When you read about John, it talks about he was the person that liked to argue. He liked to stand up, and he judged harshly people who came against Christ. It would look like this today. He argues about everything, argues about politics. Anybody have that person that sits around? I see some of y'all looking at each other. That's probably not a good thing. He argues about politics. He sits down and wants to debate, constantly wants to get into these super deep conversations, and all you want to do is eat peanut butter balls and watch Elf. Right? It's like, dude, lighten up. But Jesus had a John there. What about Matthew? Does anybody have somebody in your family that's just despised? He's the one that walks in and you just cringe. He's the one who was the prodigal who went off and did all the wrong stuff. He's the one that may cuss a lot. He's the one that may show up drunk. He's the one that was probably out partying the night before that everybody kind of whispers about. He was the despised one. That would have been Matthew in this situation. Maybe your family members got a habit you don't agree with. Maybe they got a belief you don't agree with. Maybe they don't even believe in the Jesus that you believe in, right? Matthew sat around Jesus' table. Then there's Thomas. Anybody got a negative person in your family? You know that person. You wake up and you're, Merry Christmas. What's merry about it? Joy to the world. I'll be glad when this is done. I mean, they're just negative. They're constantly negative. It's like, hey, man, this turkey looks amazing. I bet it's dry. See, y'all are laughing because all y'all got one of those in your family. We all got those in our family. I mean, they bring the whole room down. They bring the whole conversation down. You laugh, and they're like, oh, it'd be funny, but I knew a guy. It's just like, dude, lighten up. Or they're passive-aggressive about everything. You know, you'll be all having a great conversation, and they like ask a question while they're really complaining about it. Well, how much nutmeg did you put in that pie? Huh. Does nutmeg even go in pie? I don't know. I'm looking at Tim like you know either, dude. I'm like, I don't know. But Jesus had a Thomas. He was a doubter. He doubted everything. He's just kind of that negative Nancy type person. How about Simon the Zealot? How about that guy who's just different? He kind of sits off in the corner during all the parties. And everybody in the family doesn't really know what to do with him. They're like, do I talk to him? Do I not? He's a little bit nuts. Right? You never really know what's going on. He's kind of a loner. Sits off. Simon the Zealot was around there. Then you got Nathaniel. He was always talking junk to everybody. Even when Nathaniel heard about Jesus, he said, what good thing could come out of Nazareth? I mean, he didn't like anybody. Right? Anybody got a Nathaniel? How about James? Everything, every decision had to flow through James. Very controlling. Anybody got a controlling person? It's like you're in there cooking, and they walk in and they tell you how to cook. You're in there with your own recipe, and they tell you what their recipe ought to be. Maybe it's you set the table, and they're like, well, we always set the forks on this side. To which I go, who cares? Shut up. But they're very controlling, like every decision has to go through them. You start talking about whose house and next thing you know, you got an 84-point Christmas agenda. And they're the ones who did it. And there's no room for anything. They're just controlling. Anybody got somebody like that in your family? And if you just looked at your spouse and said your mother, you're in trouble. But we have people. We have people. How about the one who betrayed you? How about the family member that hurt you? How about the one who betrayed you? How about the one that talked smack about you last year that you heard about later? How about the one who walked away from you? How about the one who stabbed you in the back? You know, Judas, who even at the Last Supper, Jesus sat around a table with the person that he knew would stab him in the back. Think about that for a second. He knew it because he actually talked about it. But yet he still sat and broke bread with some of the most dysfunctional people you could assemble around a table. Jesus said, I'll take the difficult ones and make them family. You see, Jesus gave us a model. For many of those people sitting around your table, they may be difficult people. For many of those that you have to deal with at work or at school or in some capacity on a ball field, they may be difficult people. But Jesus said, hey, it's family. And they will know that you follow me by how much you love one another. See, he didn't say by how much you love the easy ones to love. See, everybody likes the little cute 2-year-old running around, right? But he said, they'll know that you follow me by how much you love the crazy one in the corner, by how much you love the controlling one, by how much you love the negative one, by how much you love the difficult one. And here's the deal. Oftentimes we cringe when difficult people come into our lives, or we even want to change them. And we'll say things like, well, you can come back if you will. And we put boundaries in place. And here's the deal. Jesus said this. He said, it's not your job to change them. He said, it's your job to point them to the one who can. And so this Christmas, I want us to think about those difficult people that we often have to deal with. And how can we point them to Christ? You see, we've all messed up big time. At some point, we've all been the prodigal who have been far from God. Maybe we didn't go and blow it and do wild, crazy partying. Maybe we didn't go and do wild, crazy stuff. But all of us at one point in our life have been separated from the Father. As good as we may think we are, like the brother, the truth of it is nobody is righteous to even be at the table, right? Nobody's righteous enough. The Bible says nobody's righteous, no, not one. So even the good brother, in all of his goodness and all of his dad, I never did anything wrongness. You see, he didn't even have the right to be sitting at the table except for the grace of the Father. Colossians 3:13 says it like this: make allowance for each other's fault and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive them. Everybody say must. Yeah, some of y'all don't like that word, do you? I don't like that word. Because when I look at this verse, this is a commandment from God and His Word. Make allowances for the difficult people. Make allowances for those who are far from God. And we must forgive the way Christ forgave us. How does He forgive us? The Father forgave unconditionally. When we look at this story, the Father forgave unconditionally. He ran to the Son. And He said, regardless of where you've been, regardless of what you've done, I love you. Come back home. It's the Christmas story. Those who are far away have come back home. Forgive those who are difficult because your Father forgave you. And He forgave you unconditionally. Matthew 18:21-25 says, then Peter came up to Him and he asked, Lord, how often should I forgive somebody who sins against me? And then Jesus replied. See, Peter, a lot of people think he was being a little bit of a smart aleck. I don't believe that. I believe Peter had an offense and he was asking, Jesus, he said, how many times do I got to forgive somebody that comes against you? How many times do I got to forgive somebody who comes against me? What, 7 times? And then Jesus says, no, 70 times 7. And while some of us may want to go and start actually adding up 490 times, the point behind what Jesus was saying is it's a number that you can't keep up with. We should forgive others the same way God forgives us, which is constantly, daily, and unconditionally. Even the most difficult people in your world this Christmas, Jesus says you should continue to forgive them the way I forgive you, unconditionally and constantly. And you see, when we look at forgiveness, when we look at the gift of forgiveness, when we look at the gift of grace through the Father's eyes, what we see is not what we deserve. You see, the son deserved for the dad to walk up and kick him off the property. The son deserved for the dad to turn his back on. The son deserved to only be a hired hand. But he didn't get what he deserved. The same as none of us deserve the birth of Jesus Christ and the gift that gives us. And so we ought to extend that gift this Christmas. If you had any doubt about your standing, if you're in here this morning, you have any doubt about your standing with God, can I give you a peace of mind this Christmas? He's standing there with his arms wide open. If you're one of those who are far from God, he's standing there with his arms wide open. And there's some people in here that would say, Pastor, but you don't understand what they did. Matthew 6:15. But if you refuse to forgive others, your Father will not forgive you. This verse hits me. See, there's a couple of people in my life. I don't want to forgive. I want to throat punch. It's true. They talk trash, stab me in the back, hurt my family. And everything in me wants revenge, not forgiveness. But when I read this verse, it says, but if you refuse to forgive others, if you refuse to extend the gift that I have given you, if you refuse to forgive others, your Father will not forgive your sins. That's scary to me because I know what I've done. And so this Christmas, when I think about having to extend the gift of grace, and I think about the gift that I was so freely given, I start to see what God did there. He said, I'm going to give you a gift, and it's your job to pass it on, because by you giving the gift that I gave you, it points people to me. And I want to say this on the front end. Forgiveness doesn't mean totally trusting them. Forgiveness doesn't mean putting yourself back into a dangerous situation. It doesn't, physically or emotionally. But what forgiveness does mean is it means I choose to lay it down and give it to the Father. That's what forgiveness is. I choose to lay it down. I choose to lay down the hurt. I choose to lay down the past Christmases. I choose to lay down the anxiety that they bring. I choose to lay down their personality. I choose to lay whatever it is that difficult person in your life has done. I choose to lay it at the feet of the Father. This morning, as we move into the Christmas season, forgiveness is the greatest gift that you can give. Not just to others, but I want to encourage you this morning. Forgiveness is the greatest gift that you can give yourself. And I want to wrap it up with this. The third son, the one who went off the deep end. You see, the son had an open invitation. The son had an open invitation. God didn't put parameters around him. He said, anytime you want to come home, my door is open. My table, there is a seat at the table for you. Maybe you're in here this morning and you relate to this guy. You see, this is the guy I relate to. This is the guy that I relate to because I went off the deep end at one point in my life. And my dad welcomed me back and helped me. But even more importantly than that, my Father in heaven said, I forgive you. And there's pieces of my brain that I don't understand that. There's part of that I can't grasp. I can't grasp unconditional forgiveness. I can't grasp unconditional love because I struggle with unforgiveness. But God says, you don't have to stay away. I gave you an open invitation. I left a seat. He's got a place setting for us at his table. And if you're in here this morning and you're far from God, I want to encourage you, man, greatest gift. This is the season. God said, I gave you my son. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to do anything for it. I freely give it. And see, that's hard to grasp sometimes because how can it be that easy? There's got to be a catch. God says there was a catch. He said, I lost my son. You see, when we look at the price, it's not repayable. You see, there was a catch. But God said, it's my catch. He said, I give you my son. And so the Word became flesh. And He came to earth to allow us a seat at the table. You see, I believe all of us at some point have been that difficult person. I would argue that all of us have been the controlling person or the angry person or the dysfunctional person or at times the one who sits in the corner that everybody wonders what's going on. We've been that person. But God says, regardless of where you've been, there's a seat at my table and I want to give you the gift. This Christmas, I want to give you a gift. And I can use your past. I can use your story. We watched it last week. A massive story of redemption. But that's a story for each and every one of us. No matter how far we've run from God, He said, there's a seat at the table for you. You know, when I look at those disciples, you know, the crazy, dysfunctional ones, I go, Peter, the loud, brash, rub you the wrong way guy, the rock upon which the whole church was built. When I look at John, the guy who liked to debate and was massively judgmental, he wrote 5 books of the Bible, and he was said to be the most loved by Jesus. When I look at Matthew, you know, the guy that was despised, and even the other disciples were like, you're going to eat with that guy? He wrote the first gospel, and he took Christ to Persia and Ethiopia, where he gave his life for the one who gave him a chance. Thomas the doubter, missionary to Syria, martyred for his faith. Simon the zealot, missionary to Persia, martyred after refusing to bow down to their gods. James, stoned and clubbed to death for his faith. You see, God took some really dysfunctional people, and I have a feeling that he knew when he was getting this group together what they were capable of. And I have a feeling this Christmas he's looking down right now and he knows what you're capable of. As we get ready to move into 2019, new year, new season, what are you going to do with it? This morning I'm an action guy. We're getting ready to move into communion, and if our guys will go ahead and come up. As we get ready to move into communion, when you sat down, you might have sat either on or beside a note card. There's pens throughout the seat, and if you don't have a pen in your seat, there's a lady beside you with a purse. They probably stole one. Look in their purse. Just kidding. You can have all the pens you want. But here's the deal. I want us to write it down. Because beginning today, what I want us to do, and here's the deal, if you don't want to let it go, don't write it down. You can keep living in bitterness, you can keep living in forgiveness, but be very careful. Because as we saw this morning, to not forgive others is probably a dangerous place for us to be hanging. But this morning, if there's somebody that you struggle with forgiving, if there's somebody who's hurt you, if there's somebody in your family that's difficult that you want to pray for, if there's something you've done in your past, like the prodigal, that you feel like God can't forgive, can I tell you something? He knows about it. This morning I want you to write it down. Don't put a name, just write down what you need to. And we've built this little manger up here. And this is what I want us to do as you come down, as we remember the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And as we project forward to 2019, and as we move into the day that we celebrate Christmas, let's give a gift this morning. They may not need it. They may not even know that they need it. They may not even want it. But give a gift to yourself this morning. Lay down the bitterness. Lay down the hurt. Lay down the pain. Give the person you feel responsible for to the one who can actually change it. This morning, let's give a gift to Christ. And it's symbolic, I get it. But let today be the day that you move forward in Christmas with the ultimate gift of forgiveness, just as the Father gave us. Bow your head.